graduate fellow in coastal sustainability, Kimmy Hansen from UNC Chapel Hill. That was important.
Yeah.
So Kimmy's going to talk about, she's worked, and thanks to Chris and Carrie and all the folks in the town that you talk with, which have been really helpful for having these conversations. So I'm really excited to see what you come up with. So Kimmy, it's all yours. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Chris. Again, very excited to be here, and I'm hoping that, as a concluding speaker, I can kind of tie in all the things that we've been hearing for the past, 2.5 to 3 hours, to really kind of just look at, this is an era of change, especially within, not just the coastline, but specifically here in Bald Head Island. And so as Chris said, I've been studying planning or city and regional planning, and I decided to, for this project, combine all of my favorite things. I did my undergrad in environmental science. I got certified as an arborist, and then I'm now studying planning. And so I decided to combine everything and to do a scenario analysis that looks at the impacts of, the future developments that we've been talking about, and how will that impact that maritime forest. And so for the past year, I've been able to work on this project and work with Chris and Beth, which has been an amazing experience. And I just wanted to start by saying thank you to Pat and Dick Johnston as well, because this would not have been, they funded everything for this project. So I guess I just wanted to give a big round of applause for them. I'm glad everyone's still awake. That's actually why I really wanted to see if everyone's still with me. And so, let's see, there we go. So I just wanted to start with a quote. It says, "Blessed are those who plant trees under whose shade they will never sit." And so I know someone didn't go around and plant all these trees that you see here on Bald Head Island. So I would change that to get rid of plant and change it to preserve. I think that's more applicable to our situation here on Bald Head Island, and really thinking about, what will this island look like for the future generations, and what can we do now to make those changes or potentially prevent some of the things that we've heard about earlier. So I don't want to preach to the choir. I know you're all very familiar with the forest in your backyard, but just to kind of emphasize why the maritime forest is so important here. It acts as a buffer, especially during those times of tropical storms, hurricanes, that wind erosion that happens, provides habitat for the wildlife that Beth was talking about earlier, especially helps regulate the impacts of extreme heat. I know you probably are very grateful to be able to have some shade, especially on your homes in the summer, and also just increases property value. I think those are studies that have shown where neighborhoods that have urban trees increases like value of life and even mental health and other aspects like that just make it more enjoyable for the community to live there. So kind of dive in a little bit more to what I actually did for the past year. So this is a current zoning map, and it looks a little bit different maybe than other zoning maps that you've seen. And like as Chris McCall was talking about earlier, there was different PD zones, like planned development zones. And I decided to merge all those together. So that whole yellow zone that you see there, that is all planned for development, whether that's phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3. Everything within that yellow area can be built on currently. And so, yeah, so it looks kind of big. And so the areas of the forest that I was specifically looking at is everything within that yellow zone. So the preserve, that's preserved, so I wasn't too worried about that. So it's more of just what is going to happen to that forest that's in your backyard, or what's going to happen to that forest that you see when you're cruising around and you see the blue for sale signs. Like, what is it going to look like when every single wooded lot has a house built onto it? So I used mixed methods. I did a bit of quantitative and qualitative analysis. For the quantitative, I used geospatial analysis using ArcGIS Pro, and was able to analyze aerial footage in order to calculate the actual numeric value of how big is the forest currently in I think it was from 2023 data. And then also did qualitative. So I definitely see some familiar faces from some people that I've interviewed. So I was able to, we thought it was very important to get feedback from the stakeholders. As an outsider, my perspective isn't as important as yours. And so I think that was a big thing for me of wanting to understand like PHA and understand some of the design guidelines that you have throughout the construction process of being able to build here. And so, yeah, so I was able to interview 12 different stakeholders here on the island. So kind of echoing what Chris had shown earlier. So this is the trend of current development for the past 10 years on Bald Head Island. And this is going off of certificates of occupancy. There's lots of different ways that you could level the course of development. But we decided to go off of, this was how many certificates were applied every single year. So you can really see there's a huge trend once you get to 2023. And then according to Chris as well, it seems like 2024 is on the same trajectory as well to be on the higher end of things. So if I'm going off of this average, that shows about 16 new homes are built on Bald Head Island every single year, which might not seem a lot to other people, but here that is quite a bit. And so as of this year, there are only 802 undeveloped lots remaining on the island. So then if we use those, kind of what Chris was saying too, like then what remains is like Bald Head Island could be fully built out in potentially the next 50 years. So I'm glad our math was on the same page there. But again, this is just hypothetical. This is going off of the past 10 years. And this, it could stop or it could go lower, it could go higher. We don't know, but this is just kind of going off of the past 10 years. So potentially by 2074, I mean, by 2063, the year that we've been talking about a lot for this symposium, we would probably be reaching closer to full development, full build out at that point. And so again, Bald Head Island is currently over 60% built out, at 62% that Chris had mentioned. And I really like this picture because I think it shows, that lot that used to be forested and now all of a sudden it's just cleared out. So it's just like where'd that maritime forest go? Another key aspect was looking at the amount of properties that have changed hands over the past 10 years as well. So you can see a very similar pattern over the years, and based on these last 10 years, on average, about 150 properties change hands each year. In total, there's about 2,114 lots, and so this means that 7% of the properties change hands each year. So to kind of get into more of the actual geospatial analysis that I did, I was able to find some ortho imagery data from 2023, so it's fairly pretty as recent as you could get. And I was able to classify the different land covers that you see on the island. And so like the marsh, you see water, sand, and then I was able to categorize parts of the forest. And so you've got like forest canopy and understory, and then short vegetation would be, grass. And so after I calculated all that, I found that about 32% of Bald Head Island is made up of just tree canopy. And then 20% is non-canopy vegetation. And then 17% is impervious surface. So to really quickly describe impervious surface, this kind of plays a key role in this whole analysis. Impervious surface is any hardscape that doesn't allow water to penetrate down into the ground. So that'd be like your roads, your buildings, any hardscape that you have out in your yard that prevents any water from getting through, that's impervious surface. And so for this analysis too, I combined the vegetation types, because to me, the forest structure is a makeup of all those things. It's a makeup of the live oaks and of the understory and that short vegetation that you see. So currently, as of 2023, over 50% of land covered within Bald Head Island, within the municipal boundary, contains vegetation, and then 17% is impervious surface. So then throughout this analysis, I was looking at how will this change? How will these percentages of vegetation versus impervious surface change as we look at the future and look at the possibility of a full build out? And just to throw this out there as well, this was the design guideline from BHA that I was referring to throughout this process. And currently right now, each lot can only be a maximum of 25% impervious surface compared to the total lot. And that's for the total square footage. So this was like, so the baseline analysis was going off of this current design guideline. And so kind of similar to the housing stock map that we saw before. And I know it's hard to see, I'm going to show a close up in the next slide, but this is what the future build out would look like at each lot being 25% built out. And when you can zoom in, you can see that each of the squares kind of represent that 25% of each, parcel size or that lot size. So the red is the future structures and the blue is the existing structures. And I also have the silt lots in there as well, which is the land trust lots. So I'll show that closer view. So this kind of shows that I feel like when you're driving around, you're like, oh, there's not that much space. But then when you look at all of the red that's like mingled throughout there, That's all the lots that could be built on still. And this, for reference, this is over by Ida's Roost. On the right side of the golf course. So this was actually drone footage that we were able to collect a couple weeks ago from the same area of Ida's Roost. And so I liked this picture because I think it really shows like from up like an upper level view of what your homes look like mingled in the forest. But now let's see what it looks like once we have all of these homes built on. Yeah. So this is what it could look like if, you know, every single lot is built on up to 25%. So from all of this, I was able to calculate that at full build out, once every lot is built on, approximately 185 acres of maritime forest would be taken out. And that equates to about, you know, for visual perspective, 140 football fields worth of maritime forest, which is quite a lot when you think about the actual size of the island. And I think this, honestly, this amount would probably change quite a bit of landscape as well. And again, like this is just, you know, approximate estimates, you know, this isn't exact. It's going off of pixel sizes from aerial imagery. So this is kind of just an estimate of what it would look like. So to kind of play around with a little bit, I decided to do two different scenarios, playing off of that impervious surface design guideline that I discussed earlier. And so one, I talked about what happens if we increased our impervious surface even more. You know, what if we get to the end and everybody, you know, land is super valuable and people decide that they want to build extra homes on, you know, different lots, or they want to make bigger homes and increase that impervious surface size to maybe 35% maximum with each lot. So what would that look like? Or vice versa? What if we lowered the impervious surface to 20%? Maybe we just lowered it by 5. So this kind of shows that difference in those scenarios. So obviously, if you go up to 35%, then you're going to be losing even more forest. You're going to be losing 260 acres worth. And then if you go down to 5% lower, you could be saving 25 acres of maritime forest. And then this also shows that increase of impervious surface as well. And then kind of going off that whole percentage, like that pie chart that you saw earlier, this was that current, you know, we're at 52% vegetation, and that's how it would lower as you increase or decrease that impervious surface. So at full build out, and I think the full build out is the main one that I think is probably the most important, because that's the one that we know based on your current zoning and design guidelines, that's where we are headed right now, is towards that 41% and 28% impervious surface. So kind of to tie back into the stakeholder interviews, kind of the main points on this was, and I will have a paper coming out that I know Chris is probably going to send out, but it'll go into more detail about this. But I found it very surprising. So I interviewed the mayor, and I interviewed a couple of developers and builders on the island, and wanted to just kind of get different perspectives from different groups. And so from everyone that I talked to, every single stakeholder expressed a desire to help preserve the maritime forest. And I wasn't sure if I was going to get that or not, but I did. Every single person wanted to listen, they wanted to talk about it and discuss it, which I thought that's a great place to start. And so also a majority of stakeholders felt confident in the current BHA landscape guidelines that you have. However, a lot of people expressed interest in that they need to be continuously updated and reviewed on just a regular basis. And, you know, when things arise, that they could be flexible and change those things according to what the community needs. And then some of the main concerns that I found from these interviews was just the enforcement of some of the BHA guidelines. That came up in quite a few different interviews where just, you know, they're happy with where the guidelines are at, but maybe we need to focus some of our efforts on enforcing some of those guidelines and making sure when, you know, new developers come in or builders or any just new person to the island comes in, making sure that they understand what the community wants and just making sure that everyone's on the same page. And that kind of leads into the other main concern that came up, which was just proper education. And that was just proper education of new homeowners and new builders on the island. And I think kind of going back to that graph that showed all of the properties that have changed hands in the past 10 years, that's a lot of newcomers coming to the island, which is great in a way, but also it's, you know, if you have a set system that you want to keep, people have to be educated and understand what they're getting into when they do come here. And so understanding that when they come here, they can't just go clear a lot and take out as many trees as they want. Yeah, just kind of just providing some sort of education system for people who come in. So kind of some of the quick recommendations that I was thinking about as I was wrapping up this process. One was to consider investing in a forest study that could happen on a regular basis. So maybe kind of piggybacking off of what I've done and do it maybe more on like, I don't know, every other year or every 5 years. And being able to really calculate, you know, in the last 5 years, this is where we lost the most forest, or this is where we gained forest. And I think that could be very helpful as, you know, especially as you go into the next 40, 50 years, really being able to calculate where the forest is at as you develop. Another one was just investing in impervious surface data. The data that I had was kind of one that I had made from different uses and different layers. And so I think this would be a really great way to add into maybe that first recommendation of being able to provide some sort of study that could be done annually. And then lastly, I think probably my biggest recommendation would just be to get your guys' input. You know, I think at the end of the day, the public and the residents and people who live here, you're gonna be the ones who decide what happens. You're gonna be the ones that make those decisions. And so I think doing some sort of survey or, you know, getting together, talking about what you want the future to look like, I think would be very important moving forward. So just lastly, kind of going off of that, the BHI community has the power to decide what future scenario will occur. So just again, like the power is in your hands. You know, as an outsider, it was super interesting to learn about the community. And I think, you know, Beth asked me last night, like, what would you recommend the most? And I think it would just be, you know, the power community is very important in these types of decisions. Zoning can be changed, guidelines can be changed. You know, the phases aren't permanent, like things can be changed if you wanted to. And so, yeah, so that was my project.
Thank you.